Good evening and welcome to Normal Island for normal people on their normal Friday. I'm Cog and I will be acting as your host for this evening. Tonight we'll be looking at Putin's threat of a direct war with the West, Tory donor Frank Hester and money in politics, a Daily Mail article about how young people like myself are far too soft, and Netanyahu's latest corruption scandal. And I'm very excited to be joined throughout the show by a personal favourite TikToker of mine, by my fellow fragile snowflake, Aidan, aka Goattmeall.
Hello,
Aidan
everyone.
makes the most amazing and relatable British political content, honestly. Sorry, how are you doing, mate?
I'm very well, very well. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me. And I guess it is amazing, relatable British content, but as is yours, Cog. So thank you very much for that.
Oh, that's sweet of you to say. And you iconically wearing the hat as well, which is a key feature.
It's part of it.
It's good. It's great. Yeah, always have a look. Anyway, so don't forget, we want to hear from you and we will be responding to your comments. So please do put them in the chat. So let's go on to our first story of the evening. Tensions between Russia and the West have been escalating in the past 24 hours, with Britain stoking Russia's ire in particular. Russia revoked the accreditation of 6 British diplomats that it accused of spying, and Putin had some more threats for NATO countries. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been discussing the possibility of allowing Ukraine to use long-range missiles inside Russia. This would include British-French Storm Shadow missiles. This comes as Iran steps up its military support to Russia, supplying them with drones and now close-range ballistic missiles, that's CRBMs for those who don't know, for their use in Ukraine. According to the BBC, Vladimir Putin said that this isn't about allowing or banning the Kiev regime from striking inside Russian territory. It does that already with drones and by other means. But when we talk about high-precision, long-range weapons made in the West, this is a completely different matter. The Ukrainian army is not able to strike with modern high-precision, long-range missiles, long-range systems. It can't do this. It is only possible with intelligence data from satellites that Ukraine doesn't have, data that's only from satellites of the European Union, the USA, NATO satellites. The key point is that only servicemen of NATO countries can input flight missions into these missile systems. Ukrainian servicemen cannot do this. Therefore, this is not about permitting or not permitting the Ukrainian regime to strike Russia with these weapons. This is about whether or not NATO countries take the decision to directly participate in the military conflict. However, it seems unlikely that Ukraine is incapable of using them, given that Ukraine has been using modified Storm Shadow missiles for over a year after the UK delivered them a small batch in May 2023. Later in the day, Putin added, "This will mean the NATO countries, the United States and European Union countries, are at war with Russia. And if this is the case, then bearing in mind the change in the essence of the conflict, we will make appropriate decisions in response to the threats that will be posed to us." What exactly this means is unclear, but Western forces seem largely to be viewing it as a bluff. Of course, if it isn't a bluff, that doesn't necessarily mean Putin would jump straight into the use of tactical nuclear weapons, as Moscow has cyber warfare, interference with undersea infrastructure, misinformation campaigns, airspace disruption, and many other options at its disposal, besides immediately jumping to nuclear weapons. On his way to Washington, Keir Starmer was asked for his response to Putin, and he has said, "Russia started this conflict. Russia illegally invaded Ukraine. Russia can end this conflict straight away. To reiterate, it was Russia who started this in the first place. They caused the conflict. They're the ones who are acting unlawfully." Now, Aidan, I'm of two minds about how seriously we should take this story, because on the one hand, Putin does make threats all the time based on red lines that he constantly changes, but he is clearly being quite dishonest about Ukraine's capabilities. But the risks involved, on the other hand, are quite high, as even a small nuclear exchange or strike in mainland Europe that got out of hand could be devastating for the environment and cost millions of lives. It's a high-risk game to be playing. So what do you think about the inherent danger involved here, first of all?
So I think there are, of course, dangers in having, playing with Russia in this way, because Putin is sort of unreliable. You can't predict the way he's going to act. So I think there are inherent risks in playing with him in this way. And although saying that there's only so many times someone can make a threat like this before you really start to think, if you were going to do something, you'd do it. And considering how badly he's done trying to take on Ukraine, which is the 18th most powerful military in the world, his threats of he'll try and, take on NATO, which is far more, economically and militarily powerful. I just don't think it's really hitting the way he thinks it is. So I think there are inherent risks, of course. There always are when you're playing with someone like this. But I think they're not so bad that we need to take him too seriously as of yet.
Yeah, I find myself in broad agreement with that analysis, especially as he has lots of other means at his disposal, and analysis of Yandex over the past couple of years, Yandex being like Russia's version of Google, does show that Russians definitely have doubts about the war. They're not fully behind it, and the deal they've sort of struck with Putin is, we will be behind you in this war. We will support you so long as it doesn't start to affect our lives. And it is really starting to affect the lives of not just the rural Russians, but the Russians who are in city centers now. It's reaching that that sort of point when you start talking about long range missiles inside Russia. I suppose that's the trade off there. I don't know actually your thoughts, because I'm interested to know what are your thoughts in terms of nuclear disarmament. Are you sort of full campaign against nuclear disarmament? Campaign for nuclear disarmament.
I really want to keep the nukes. Let's keep more nukes, everybody. Now, I'm pro nuclear disarmament, just because it's just very much such a select group of men, let's be honest, select group of men pointing guns at each other in a room where everyone else in that room doesn't have a gun and thinks you're going to miss, so please just don't fire it. We're better off not having it. But I understand this. It's such a 50-50, isn't it? Because there's the other side of that aisle where you're like, yeah, but everyone having them has meant that no one's used them because of the mutually assured destruction. And Russia is proof that you can't, and North Korea and lots of other countries, America too, that you can't trust what governments tell you they're actually doing. So true nuclear disarmament, I'm pro. But nuclear disarmament amongst this kind of hyper-capitalistic military, industrial complex system, I don't entirely think is really entirely possible. But I'd be very happy to move towards it if we could do that.
It's incredibly terrifying when you realize, I think a lot of people think of nuclear weapons and they think World War II, a single bomb that drops from the from a plane, drops from the sky, there's a big explosion and it takes out a city. And quite apart from the size of modern nuclear weapons, which are 100 times bigger, you've also got the fact that a modern nuclear warhead launches a missile, and then the warhead breaks apart and drops 100 of those bombs across an area. It's terrifying. The sheer terror of it. I remember going to a talk when I was at uni. I was doing history and politics, and one of the things I distinctly remember was we had a nuclear weapons expert come in. It was a woman who came in. And she gave us the advice that if we're ever in a nuclear, you'll hear lots of rubbish if you're ever in a nuclear strike. But she said the first thing she would do if there was a nuclear weapon going off anywhere near her is run outside wearing black, because you burn up the quickest, and that is better than the what follows, And it's if that's the advice of the experts, Jesus.
Yeah, it's when you see a guy wearing a T-shirt with "I'm a bomb diffuser. If you see me running, you run too." It's kind of that kind of thing.
Yes, that is exactly the vibe. Yeah. I'm interested in what's called virtual nuclear arsenals. So Japan and I think it might be South Africa hold what's called a virtual nuclear arsenal, which is a nuclear arsenal that can be put together in the event of them being struck. But they don't hold a nuclear arsenal ready to fire. I think that would be a reasonable step for us in nuclear disarmament to take. I don't know what your sort of view of virtual nuclear arsenal and that is.
No, that I think you're completely right. That is the kind of step I could see more realistically happening. That sounds like something that you could convince people to do, because it's a little bit like having a fully powerful, fully fledged army at all times. It's not cost effective, and it's not reasonable. You're better off having an elite force and then lots of people that are ready to go should you need to go. And that sounds like a similar kind of move. And it's the same, and also the way that wars are being fought these days. I think it's kind of an inevitable next step, because like you say, the idea of the classic nuclear bomb isn't a thing anymore, and they're more and more expensive to create, and so it doesn't make sense to just constantly have them ready to go. Financially speaking, which is the language you have to speak to for these people to listen to you.
Yeah, it's absurdly expensive. I'm just going to do another quick section. So there's another side to this to be considered, and that's Iran's motivations for providing Russia with CRBMs in the first place. Mark Katz, professor of politics and government at George Mason University, wrote for the Atlantic Council that Iran has sought Su-35 fighter aircraft and S-400 air defense missile systems from Russia, according to the reports, but Moscow has not yet delivered them. Moscow, though, will be loath to transfer weapons to Iran that would upset its ability to maintain good relations with Iran's rivals, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, which could in turn result in their turning closer to the United States and even Israel for support. Indeed, Iran Iran itself might not want this to happen. Saudi-Russian cooperation in the OPEC Plus format, which keeps world oil prices relatively higher, serves Iranian interests too. And Katz goes on to say that while Tehran may want Moscow to transfer Su-35s, S-400s, and other weapon systems and technologies, receiving them immediately may not be the Iranian leadership's primary goal. The Islamic Republic does not take direct military action itself, but prefers to act through small proxies such as Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Iraqi and other Shia militia forces. Tehran, then, may see Russia not so much as a great power, but as another proxy whose willingness to fight against a common enemy benefits Iran, but allows it to avoid the costs of fighting that common enemy itself. So, Aidan, when I read this, my mind immediately went to Israel's flagrant violations of Iranian sovereignty in the Middle East and the genocide in Palestine. I'm generally a supporter of Ukraine and Palestine, but I can't shake the feeling that allowing Israel to commit genocide in Palestine might be strategically stupid as well as morally abhorrent. Do you think this is, like, to some degree, the fallout from Palestine and that poor geopolitical strategy? And could the knock-on effects be that Russia has, like, an even worse relationship with the West and gets us, like, closer to some sort of conflict that, all right, might not be a nuclear conflict, but might lead to significant escalation?
Yeah, well, of course, isn't it? I mean, the two issues are so intrinsically linked in the way that you watch, like, the West and Russia and China and all of the players act. It's so because it's so symptomatic. That's the wrong word. Symbiotic in the way that these, like, you can't. The West being so pro-Israel and then trying to criticize Russia for how they act in Ukraine and in Crimea, these two things don't work, and it's going to cause frays to happen even more, because it's already causing a fray inside the politics of every single nation that's involved in these things. And so I could see it definitely spilling over and making it even harder to come to some kind of peace treaty with anybody involved in any of these conflicts, because no one's acting with complete, like, moral, the word I'm trying to remember, I've forgotten, but trying to keep consistency, moral consistency. No one's acting with this right moral consistency, so it's going to cause problems for everybody.
Yeah, I do think, I think that is definitely the case. And it's that stark contrast between the Ukrainian people have a right to defend themselves from invasion and occupation.
Yeah.
They have a right to self-determination, but the Palestinian people don't.
Yeah.
Do you think that? I mean, I think this is kind of an answer that I'd be surprised if you disagree with. But do you think there's a massive like bucket load of white supremacy involved in that? The difference in the way that we treat Ukraine and the way that we treat Palestine.
You know, I wouldn't actually. No, yeah, of course it is. Of course it is. It's absolutely so intrinsically linked to the fact that, and this is quite a hot thing to say, but it's brown people dying and not white people dying. That is the thing. And we saw that the way that we welcomed Ukrainian immigrants in, or asylum seekers in, to the Western countries of Europe, but shun the idea of any Palestinians moving here. It's so insane. It's linked. It's so linked.
Yes, yeah, and the sort of like the contrast in headlines as well. Like Russia does actively bomb a hospital. Israel doesn't bomb a hospital. The hospital just gets bombed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
The hospital just does that.
Yeah. It's just, this is what hospitals do. They yes, of course. But yes, we should probably, although this has been a big headline today, we should probably move on to our second story. So, how many of you remember the name Frank Hester? It'll be in your memory somewhere. There it is. Hester is the largest Conservative Party donor, donating millions to the party, which he believes serves his interests. Mr. Hester was the centre of a scandal earlier this year when his misogynoir was put on full display. Speaking of Diane Abbott in 2019, Mr. Hester is alleged to have said that she should be shot and that she made him want to hate all black women. The Conservative Party said that they would not return his donations, but they condemned the remarks. However, this week, the Electoral Commission revealed that as they were condemning him, they were taking £5 million in donations just prior to announcing the general election. According to the BBC, Electoral Commission records published this week show that the party accepted the sum from Mr. Hester's Leeds-based healthcare software company, the Phoenix Partnership, TTP, on 17th of May. There is a 3-month lag before donations are made public by the Commission. Mr. Hester's £5 million donation in May follows £150,000 accepted in March, £5 million in January, and £10 million donated to the party last year, totaling more than £20 million since the start of 2023. According to parliamentary records, he also gifted the Prime Minister the use of a helicopter for a political visit in November last year, valued at £15,900. The BBC went on to highlight the bigger picture with donations and political parties. The total amount of donations accepted by the Conservative Party in the run-up to the election was just over £16 million, with Mr. Hester's donation via his business, the Phoenix Partnership, being the largest. The Labour Party received just over £26 million in donations in that time, and its biggest donation from an individual entity was £4 million from hedge fund Quadrature Capital. The Electoral Commission's Jackie Kylene said that £51.6 million in donations was accepted by all political parties in the same period, between April and June 2024, which was one of the biggest donation amounts on record for a 3-month period. I'm losing my ability to speak. I'm so sorry. Firstly, Aidan, do you want to say anything about Frank Hester and what it potentially says about the Conservative Party that he's such a big donor to them?
I mean, I kind of just want to say, are we surprised? Really, the Tories would take a donation from the Savile Foundation if they could. They are very much like they're comic book villains. So finding out that they were so happily taking money from him isn't surprising to me in the slightest. It is telling, though, that that party is so intrinsically linked to that behavior, and it makes me think about what's going to happen in the future with them. Just thinking, like, if there's still news stories like this coming out about them, what is going to happen as they reform and try to come back again for the next election?
Funny you should use the word reform there. I don't know whether that was a that could happen. Of course, I am concerned, as I'm sure you are, about like the orientation. I shouldn't say reorientation. The orientation of our politics around profit, and the damage that can do in terms of like our ability to democratically tackle things like the climate crisis and all that stuff, our ability to live in a fairer society. But also, I should point out, because I feel like we can't go through a show without holding the Labour government to account to some degree. There is also another side to this, and that's that Labour were pretty racist against Diane Abbott when you look at the leaks that came out during the Jeremy Corbyn era, and rather it's Keir Starmer's allies, but at the time of the Jeremy Corbyn era. I want to be very clear about that. It wasn't Jeremy Corbyn specifically. And the Ford report, which finds that there is a hierarchy of racism where racism against Black and Asian people just simply isn't taken as seriously as that which is rightfully condemned, the racism against Jewish people, and having this hierarchy of racism, it's got to be unacceptable, and there's some culpability, I think, in the Labour Party in this, to the degree that a lot of the people at the top of the party right now, and a lot of the people surrounding the party, in my opinion, normalized a culture of hatred against Diane Abbott in particular. I think she was the most abused MP in the 2019 election, if I'm remembering that right. Yeah, what do you sort of make of like the general culture of abuse that surrounded Diane Abbott in particular?
I think she just became a punching bag for anyone that wanted to score political points. So she just, anything that, any faux pas, any error, any slight misspeaking was just held up as her being this useless, unable to think person that shouldn't be in politics. And that is obviously so related to her race and her gender. I think Labour are, well, you know, they'll probably think twice before they come out swinging at the Tory party about this donor, because obviously they know their record and it could so easily be held up against them. And I think the culture of this hierarchy of racism within politics is, it's rotting. I mean, politics is rotten to the core in this country. We know that already. And this is just a facet of that rot, I think.
Yeah, I think it does sort of, the money side gets to the core of why that rot exists, right? So much more the hate is the point. How there's a sort of like a logic that seems to exist on the conservative and right, that what triggers and annoys is true. You know, like whatever annoys our opponents the most. It's like being at a football match. Whatever annoys our opponents the most, that's what's true. Nothing else kind of gets involved. Nothing else matters. And I think there's a danger of like liberals falling into that trap and going, well, whatever annoys the conservatives is. Yeah,
wholeheartedly, which I think we've seen already on the early days of the Labour government that we've currently got, with getting rid of the Rwanda scheme, which was obviously the correct thing to do and it was a win for like anyone with a brain. But it was so quickly used as a tool to mock the Tories and to be like, aha, we're winding you up. Look at what we've done. We've scrapped your idea. We've scrapped your plan. And I think the Liberals do fall into that trap as much as these Conservatives do. But it's something that I think will only continue with sort of this neoliberal Labour that we've got. It won't be changed. And I think someone like Diane Abbott is a real symbol of the effects of what these Liberals do.
Yeah. I think that's definitely true. I'm worried going forward about where Keir Starmer's going with this, because I've seen a lot of Keir Starmer's supporters, regardless of what you think about means testing the winter fuel allowances. I have seen a lot of the argument of not this is the fair thing to do, but how do you guys like it now that the pensioners are not the sort of primary voting demographic in control of the situation as they were under the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party pretty much worked at the behest of pensioners who were, I would say, radicalized to a huge degree by the papers that they were reading, by a media monopoly that had them like by the throat and got them to vote for the Conservative Party. And radicalize them against immigrants, to some degree against LGBT people. But that powerful voting bloc now, of course, has like less power under Labour. But I think there's a sort of like, there's something you've got to be careful of, not to turn around and go, well, I want not just the single mums to, you know, if you're worried about single mums who were victimized under the Conservative Party, turning around and saying, well, pensioners should live in poverty too, is not the answer. The answer is that actually we should get the rich to pay a bit more tax so that we can all live better lives, and we don't have to like victimize pensioners or the or disabled people. Maybe I'm waffling.
No, you're precisely right, because I've seen so many arguments happening from people online who are almost giddy that the Labour government are doing something to damage this idea they've got of the wealthy pensioner, which, don't get me wrong, they exist, but that's by far and away not the average like pensioner. And the fact that you could have anyone that wants to call themselves, left wing or a lefty, and who celebrates pensioners having, funding taken away from them, feels so abstract. I feel like that those ideas can't really operate in the same head. And I definitely think that we are seeing that kind of, an eye for an eye from a lot of Labour supporters. And it's a very dangerous road to go down, because you start celebrating budget cuts and taking money away from people rather than doing the thing we all know we're going to eventually have to do, which is to do windfall taxes on energy companies in order to recoup losses and take their profits away from them. It's like one of the only answers we've got, and eventually they're going to someone is going to have to do it. And the longer we wait, the worse it's going to get, because they're going to cut a lot of things before they get to that stage. And so to see, even liberals celebrating this idea of taking money away from pensioners, it's baffling. It's baffling to me.
Yeah, I think any kind of decent socialism that I'd want to be a part of would be seeking to include the elder generations who've been kind of left out of these patterns of thought of, like, actually we want a more just society. We want a society that isn't oriented around capital and profit, and is actually oriented around people and humanism, decolonialism, and bringing pensioners along with that idea, and making sure that we're representing them as well.
Of course, couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I think that has to be I feel like people are a little bit deceived by the a quarter of pensioners a millionaire figure. It's a slight misconception. In some cases, there are, as you say, some very rich pensioners. However, it's a slight misconception, because a lot of that quarter of pensioners and millionaires is including the pensioners' assets. And if you're an elderly person who lives in London, you might barely be paying your bills. But at the same time, you own an asset that's worth quite a lot. But if you give up that asset, you're then on the rental market, and the rental market is going to be far worse for you. You're going to have nothing left to leave your grandchildren by the time landlords are done with you. They're asset rich. Our producers just put in the chat, they're asset rich, but they have low liquidity. I think that's a brilliant way of thinking about it. Yes. Do you mind if I add some extra context to this?
Please.
So, according to the European Commission's Transparency International report from 2023, there are many restrictions on political donations in different countries. So, corporate firms and other legal entities. So, for example, in France, corporate firms and other legal entities are prohibited from financing candidates. Anonymous donations exceeding €150 are not allowed. Individuals are permitted to contribute up to €7,500 annually to political parties, and a total of €4,600 to candidates in each election. That's both parliamentary and presidential. And in Portugal, it's different again. Portugal calculates donation limits based on the minimum wage. Donations of pecuniary nature made by identified natural persons are subject to an annual limit of 25 times the value of the minimum wage per donor. And Ireland has an even simpler approach. Ireland imposes an annual limit of €2,500 on campaign donations. Now, in the UK, we cap the amount that political parties can spend on an election at £35 million, moved up in November last year from £19 million. So now there's more money in our politics. We also don't cap the amount that an individual can donate, as long as they declare it over a threshold of £11,180. In other words, if you donate more than £11,180, you must declare it, but you can still make the donation. So my question is, Aidan, what effect do you think that this deregulation of money in politics will have, and can anything be done really to reverse it?
I think we're just watching people being fish hooked into privatization, which is what it is. It's because the only people that have that money are people with a lot of money rolled up in capital. So they've got a lot of capital rolled up in businesses. And so these people will then fish hook the government into pulling them more towards the idea that privatizing things and running things for profit is the ultimate way of running the country. And it doesn't matter how intelligent we think these politicians are, having someone in their ear the entire time, whether they be from a business or a think tank or a donor, all of these people are putting money into politics one way or another. It will shape our policy. And I think we're seeing it more and more with this idea that We don't need to improve anything in the NHS when it comes to funding or organisation or where the money goes. We just simply need to try a little bit harder, and the NHS will be fixed. It's a prime example of it, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's the idea that the way to solve the crisis has been created by more private interests in the NHS that stripped funding and then gone, well, you can pay £60 an hour to have a nurse that you would usually be paying, £20 an hour for. The idea that that's more efficient has sort of been like crept in by the back door, when of course it's just obviously not more efficient, and our politicians are like kind of vulnerable to this, right? Starmer has taken more freebies than I think it's Blair, Brown, Miliband, and Corbyn combined, which is insane.
That's a crazy thing to know. I didn't know that. The fact that he's so open to it as well, and the fact that I think on top of these businesses being in their ear and these gifts that they're called and these donations people get, we also have a media class that now seems to be symbiotic. Same word again, symbiotic with politicians. They're almost two of the same thing, and more we're seeing that line blur where people like Lee Anderson are getting paid a crazy amount of money to both be an MP and a recurring figure on multiple right-wing news corporations. I think we're getting into really dangerous territory where like the media class and politicians are becoming the same people, and there's even more money in that now. So that will lead to more and more privatization and more money being pushed into politics. And we know that money doesn't necessarily make people bad, but it can easily corrupt you when it comes from the bad places.
Yeah, it's the revolving door, which I think has existed for quite a long time between the media class in this country and the political class.
Yeah,
it's becoming just more blatant. They're just doing more like, I can go on GB News, I can just be a presenter.
Yeah. It's an automatic door at this point.
Yeah, it's an automatic door at this point, exactly. I'm kind of interested though in as that report said, Portugal have the donations set at 25 times the value of the minimum wage. I think that's actually far too high. I think it probably should be something like 1 or 2 times the minimum wage at most. But would you be like in favor of some sort of system like that? Because I think it's an interesting thing in concept, right?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting concept. I think I would be in favor of an idea like that because there's many ways that countries have sort of dealt with inequalities by tying them to the minimum wage. Sort of, I can't remember what country. I think it's a Nordic country that the CEO can only make, I think it's something like 20 times what the lowest minimum wage is. Or that's what their bonus could be. There's some kind of tie like that, and it works. It's a system that is, a little bit clunky and a little bit sort of unromantic in its solution, but it does get answers. So I wouldn't be opposed to the idea of tying party donations to the minimum wage, because either then politics would have to get a little bit more lean, which would be good for it because it's just currently a big fat cat that needs to lose weight, or the minimum wage would have to rise. But then if the minimum wage rises to a point just to make them get more donations, then they can politics in such a way in which inflation kind of wipes out any minimum wage rise. So I'm pro it in concept, but there definitely is a lot more work that needs to be done around getting that idea to be solid.
You make a really good point there about inflation and them using inflation, because of course, if they're controlling interest rates as well, they're controlling the rate that they're controlling the mechanism by which we would usually monitor and control inflation.
Precisely.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. But I love the idea of tying things to the minimum wage. I love the idea that like climbing the proverbial ladder by capitalists and profit seekers can be made that a little bit harder if you're like handcuffing the person at the bottom of the ladder to them so that they can only climb so high,
Yeah, exactly that. It's that idea. It's a very good visualization for it.
Yeah, I really I love that idea. Yep. We should move on to our next story. Now, before we do, don't forget that we will be reading out the comments after this story. So do put your comments in if you have any thoughts about the stories we've spoken about so far, or the story that we're about to discuss. So, the Daily Mail is not known for its great relationship with young people. The issues we face are almost always dismissed on the pages of the Mail, and the columnists have absolutely no problem playing into this dynamic. Writing in the Mail on Thursday, retired sociology professor Frank Furedi penned an article that was titled, No wonder so many young people are now long-term sick when they've been taught to believe they are fragile. What a title. So Faraday goes on to say, working Britain is in serious trouble. A shocking new report has revealed that tens of thousands of graduates are leaving university only to join the ranks of Britain's ever-growing numbers of long-term sick. When the young behave in ways that veer from the norm, society no longer calls them unruly or troublesome, but slaps them with a medical label. Confused or insecure children are diagnosed as depressed or suffering from trauma. Energetic or disruptive youngsters are invariably presumed to be suffering from attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. So, the next bit says, all this naked self-indulgence is becoming a public health crisis. It is making young people more fragile, not more resilient, more prone to see themselves as victims and less as capable adults. And it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Tell children that they are likely to suffer stress, trauma, and depression when they're doing their exams, and many will experience precisely that. But is this actually right? The Daily Mail will fill your granddad's head with nonsense week in and week out, seek out old retired sociology professors to tout out bullshit theories that are rejected by sociologists and by the evidence. In the Health Foundation's analysis of the figures Faraday is referring to, they state that mental ill health is now the most common cause of work-limiting conditions among those aged 44 years and younger. This represents a significant shift from 2013, when mental health conditions were less prevalent as a cause of work limitations among young workers, and ranked behind both musculoskeletal and chronic conditions. While increased awareness of and changing attitudes towards mental health may play a role in this shift, evidence from diagnostic questionnaires also indicate a rise in mental ill health over the past decade, corroborating self-reported data. The important part there is that last sentence, corroborating diagnostic questionnaires with the self-reported data. In other words, we can diagnose people from the symptoms they describe, so we know they aren't just imagining that they are mentally ill or thinking themselves into it because they're not cheery enough, right? That's not what's going on here. It's also worth noting that the Health Foundation's analysis showed an increase in work-limiting health conditions across all age groups. Now, you'd expect older people to suffer more conditions, naturally, so that's not surprising, but the increase from a decade ago does show that health conditions are worsening overall. Now, it could just be a coincidence that 10 years of austerity seems to coincide with a decline in people's health across the board, and it could all be down to the fact that we're all snowflakes. Maybe if some older people with musculoskeletal disorders just pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and stopped seeing themselves as victims, they wouldn't suffer so much more illness than they used to either. Maybe it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and if you just keep telling yourself that you're suffering from chronic disorders like arthritis, then you'll inevitably suffer from chronic disorders like arthritis. You'll inevitably experience exactly that. Or maybe we could be honest and say that this is a health crisis, both physical and mental, that's due to the severe underfunding of services, the lack of hope and fun in young people's lives, and the devastation of the planet. Aidan, what do you think about this? It's a pretty grim being a young working class person in Britain right now, isn't it?
God. Yeah, it's terrible being a young working class person in Britain. I mean, I don't even fully classify myself as a young working class person anymore. I'm sort of out of that category at this point, but working class nonetheless. So growing up in this country was already, difficult being working class, but there was access to things. Sort of the Blairite government, for all of their foibles, had some elements of community funding that allowed you to kind of get a step in. I had community clubs that I went to. I had ways of finding people, that's kind of the thing, and then creating fun from that. And as time has gone on and funding has gotten more and more scarce in this country, young people constantly being told to take the shitty end of the stick and be happy about it. It's finally coming out in the figures that that's going to have an everlasting effect on us. And I think a prime way that you can see that is, and it sounds quite nothing, but the way the nightlife is in major cities in this country is nothing compared to what it was like for literally decades. It's completely been destroyed by sort of lack of funding, the lack of innovation. There's just no money in the country to really have these kinds of leisure activities anymore. And it's stripped the joy away from young people of having a nightlife, being able to eat past 1 a.m. in a city, which normally is something you should be able to do. But in this country, it's becoming harder and harder to do. And I think that is kind of it's a symbol of deeper problems within our culture, that young people are constantly expected to just give things up and be happy about it. And now we're seeing it have the negative effect on them. And for the Daily Mail to then be like, you're just a bunch of snowflakes, actually. You've got things so easy. You're thinking yourself sick. It's just, it's gaslighting on the biggest scale I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, funnily enough, I was going to bring up Nights Out. So that was really well, kind of, we're on the same wavelength there. But the other day I was out in the sort of big local town near where I live, and it was a Friday night like tonight, and there was barely anyone out, like barely anyone. It was dead, and it's absolutely shocking. The not only that, but like the lack of actual shops. Never mind small businesses, but just any shops that are still in operation in town centers where you could potentially get a job and stuff like that could potentially fund your night out. Just it's not happening. And I think there's been I think I mentioned this the last time I hosted as well. I've got to stop bringing this up as a complaint. But the people who are going out most now are aged between about 40 and 60 because they're the people with the money to be able to go out and pay the extortionate prices for alcohol,
It's that constant thing where everything's being weighed more towards an older generation that has more money and more power. But that ever-sliding scale never seems to want to tip back at all and give people that are getting older that. It just feels like the window of people without any money is getting older and older and older. Because I'm about to turn 28, and my clubbing days are pretty much behind me. But if I go out, I live in London, so I go out in London on a Friday and Saturday night, and it is true, I'll see a lot of older married couples on a night out, going to the theater and stuff like that, but almost no young people. And every young person I know that's either my age or a bit younger, they're more interested in going to a house party simply because it's cost effective. And now I understand young people having no money. It's not a brand new concept that you're not going to be very, very wealthy. But like you say, this idea that having shops in the high street and having small businesses getting started up and having, systems in place so people can get into work at younger ages and not have to rely on, having degrees and stuff to get into well-paying jobs. Like all of these things play into young people being able to do something with their life and enjoy it whilst they do it. And the fact that we're not seeing them out on the streets enjoying themselves and being a part of the public life and taking themselves back to their houses and back to their rooms, back online to enjoy themselves is not the sign of a healthy country. It's not a sign of a healthy society at all.
Yeah, I often do think there's sort of swings and roundabouts to being part of each generation. And I do I wouldn't want to give up the technological connection that our generation has. But at the same time, just lacking those basics, lacking those the ability to sort of go out on nights out. It's not not the only concern that we should talk about, but it is one of the things that's kind of symptomatic and it sort of makes our lives more miserable. There's also the other side to it, which is the lack of youth services you mentioned, but also climate change. The idea that we might not have a future that's free of famine and war and water shortages. I think it was Ash Sakar who said, I don't want to spend my 70s guarding a water bottle with a sniper rifle. That's not how I want to spend my 70s, I think that sort of that devastation, that sort of feeling of hopelessness, it eats away at the back of your mind, and that sort of thing can lead in many ways to this kind of mental health crisis. But it's just conditions in the same way as it's conditions for elderly people as they get older to become to suffer more musculoskeletal conditions, to suffer more chronic conditions. It seems to me that if you put people in conditions where they're faced with a future where we just might not have a future, then things are going to get really really sucky really quickly, and more young people are going to suffer from mental health problems. I'm about your age. I'm 26. I turn 27 later this year, and I don't know about you, but I certainly know people I've lost, to mental health related conditions, and it's something that, like, yeah, it's hit our generation in a way that I don't think a lot of older people can necessarily quite understand. Being forced through the school system like this, it's
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. I think we've all been touched by sort of things like that in a way that I don't think a lot of generations have been, or if they have, they haven't been aware of the reasons as to what's led to it, whereas we're more acutely aware of sort of the weight that the world takes on our brains and our psyches. But I think you touched on a good point there by basically saying that we've stripped away hope from young people. And one of the greatest things young people have is a bit of hope and a bit of stupidity, not knowing that they don't know how to do things, so they do them anyway. That's kind of the thing a young person needs in order to succeed. But you've taken that away from them, because the way that we see governments treat anything, any kind of, look at the way that a lot of them handled the COVID pandemic. Like, ultimately, we managed to keep that under, a certain level. It wasn't an extinction level an event for us, which could have been. But the way that it was handled, even that, we thought, man, that was all we needed for that was a vaccine. To get them to work together, we have to solve climate change. That's a way bigger problem. So they barely managed to get the vaccine to work properly, let alone them do this. So young people have just watched these governments fumble things after fumbling things. And I think it's just eaten away at this idea that eventually things will get better. And young people now are kind of feeling that, and they're feeling that there is a lack of hope about how our governments will deal with the biggest problem facing us as a race, as humans.
Beautifully put. A bit of hope and a bit of stupidity. That's what makes young people so ambitious, so radical. I love that, and that's going to make a really nice clip. Actually, I'm just thinking about this from an editor's point of view. That's going to make a really nice clip at some point in the future. So, thank you for that. That'll be a good point to end that section on. And now we could rant about that all day, and someday we will. There's plenty more to say about that. But before we go on to our final story, here is a quick message about how you can help support Turn Left. If you like what we do here at Turn Left Media, please do consider helping us out. There are 5 of us currently working on these productions now, and it's all still voluntary. We need your help to realise our vision for Turn Left, so how can you help? Well, this can either be through Patreon, where you can subscribe for £3 or £5 per month, you've heard it before, or Ko-Fi, where you can make a one-off donation, or through helping us spread our content. You can like and share our content, you can engage with it the traditional way, but if you want to make some money off of us, it's mutually beneficial for us if you take clips of us that you like and put them on TikTok. It's a really unique way to share our content. You can simply download our YouTube videos, take them into a free app like CapCut, slice out the parts you like, change the aspect ratio, zoom it in to suit TikTok, and then you're good to upload that to your TikTok channel. It helps us out massively, but you could also make some money when the TikTok clips you've uploaded do well on TikTok and you get access to the Creator Fund. There's a lot of different and unique ways to help grow Turn Left, and we're grateful to each and every one of you for your contributions. Thank you very much. Brilliant. Thank you. So we brought Goattmeall back up, and now we're going to react to some comments that we're getting.
Sure.
So what have we got? First of all, of course, cool Tash.
Thank you very much. Grew it myself.
It's very good. It's very good. Hope you got a little comb for it.
I do.
You do? Oh,
I do.
That's amazing. I love that. All right. Yes, what's next on the comments list? The West must stop arming Ukraine and threatening World War III. Right. Okay, so I'll give my reaction to this first of all.
Sure.
I think that you don't necessarily avoid further conflict. You don't necessarily avoid a conflict with an enemy by constantly giving ground. If you constantly give ground to them, they're going to keep doing it. They're going to keep causing problems. Like, this isn't the first time that Russia has acted aggressively. They've invaded several other countries, including Georgia, including Crimea. We need to well, Crimea wasn't another country, but you get my point. Russia has been aggressive in the past and will be aggressive. It's fairly evident from the work of I've forgotten his name now. It's not Prigozhin. It's the guy who was there's a Russian philosopher who was known as Putin's Rasputin, and I can't remember his name. But he wrote a book about 20 years ago, in 1999, about Russia's long-term geopolitical strategy, stoking racial inequality in America, separating Europe, which he considered just a vassal of the United States. Separating Britain, which he considered just a vassal of the United States from the rest of Europe, i.e., a Brexit scenario, and invading Ukraine and starting to take over that area of the Baltics. Like, we've known his long-term political strategy has been aggressive for some time. I don't think appeasing him would have helped, is the sort of answer that I'm gonna give there.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that as well, and I would also add that it's to say to stop arming Ukraine. I understand that, like, it doesn't feel like it helps anyone to keep giving them weaponry to keep fighting Russia and to try and sit at a table, but the way that the West is able to block Putin from taking over any other part of that land is by giving Ukraine this weaponry. It's the frontier. The only way you stop Putin from doing what he's doing is by giving Ukraine this weaponry. So either you have to say you're okay with Putin taking over Ukraine, or you're okay with giving Ukraine the weapons. You can't kind of pick any other option there, because those are the options we've got. It's not an ideal scenario, of course. No one wants to be giving billions and billions of weaponry to a nation. That doesn't normally lead to anything good, but it's kind of a last resort that we're in. And it's also a little caveat to that as well that I want to add is the same way we approach how Ukraine is treated and how we're acting with Russia is the same way we should approach free speech. It's the idea that if you allow all speech, you're actually not helping free speech. You can't allow some speech, because that some speech will stop anyone else from having free speech. And Russia is that some speech. If you stop them, you make for a freer and fairer world. But if you allow them to continue, then Russia wants to take over that entire bloc. And that is not exactly a democratic way of going about things. And I think we can all agree we'd like things to be a bit more democratically ran. So that's my take on it.
Definitely, it was very well put. Alexander Dugin was the Putin's Rasputin, the philosopher I was thinking of. I'd say somebody might say in response to that, the US is really the devastating force around the world right now that's causing problems. I'd agree.
Yeah.
But it's not the only negative force around the world right now. Two groups can be like harmful at once. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that I really want to emphasize whenever I talk about this. Yes, the US is devastating and commits and facilitates and commits war crimes in the Middle East all the time, in Africa all the time. But I would also say that doesn't, the idea of that and Russia also being, committing war crimes, those two ideas aren't mutually exclusive. They can both exist at once.
Yeah, it's the good guy, bad guy fallacy. There is really neither. That we just have to operate as a per problem thing.
There's our positive generation thing coming. Yeah, okay, that's why we're like the way we are. Did all so this is the next comment, excuse me. Did you all hear about Labour MPs claiming expenses on energy bills while having salary of £900,000 in Rachel Reeves' case, while they cut pensioners' fuel allowance? I didn't actually catch that, but that's interesting. Yeah.
Yes, I can go on that. What I think is the biggest thing about this is knowing that the way politics is ran, like we were speaking about before, the inflation of money, that the growth of money in politics is gross. It's truly gross. And the fact that these politicians and liberals and the Labour government currently get to walk into a golden-plated, wonderful silk-robed, wonderful curtains, beautiful food building every single day, and be paid all of this money to do it, gives them this idea that they are better than, because of the environment they're in. And I think they forget where they are sometimes, and they forget that the decisions they're making come across the way that they do. And I think it would be a very interesting time to sit down and have a conversation with them and say, hey, why don't you give up a third of your salary, in which you'll still make more than 90% of this country, and give that to some pensioners? And then I think you'd start to see them squirm, because you start to realize the sort of, I guess, inherent selfishness that comes with being a high-ranking MP.
Yes, certain difficult decisions have to be made, but not those difficult decisions.
Yeah.
let's not go too far. You
Yeah,
know.
exactly.
Yes, guys won't like this, but the best way to avoiding World War III will be for Trump to win. Absolutely incredible.
Trump
You
wrote
want
that.
yeah. Trump wrote that. That's him on his spare account. You know, his
on his burner.
Yeah, his burner account. That was the word I was looking for. Burner account. Yeah. I mean, the guy, according to his like inner circle, the guy suggested like nuking. I think it was Hurricane Katrina, one of the hurricanes. He said, "Well, why don't we just drop a nuke on it to get rid of it?" Like, I don't think this guy is going to be the best strategy if you want to avoid a war.
No,
I
would say that for avoiding World War III, I would say maybe no, maybe not. Maybe you're wrong. I'd say actually that might be a thing. I normally I want to be open to debate. I was going to try and have a nuanced point, but I just think you're wrong.
Yeah. Okay. So, don't think that money cap even covers the in-kind donations of, for example, PwC lending their staff to help Labour. I don't know what PwC is. Sorry, that's blanked my head.
Either.
If somebody can put it in the chat, I've just yeah. Clearly, I need to read more news because I don't know what that means. But yeah, I do think that, I mean, the broader point there are political restrictions on the amount of money spent in elections and spent in on political parties. They're not they're not strict enough. Oh, it's a consultancy firm. Okay, consultancy firm. Right. Okay. Yeah, consultancy firms seem to be at the heart of everything awful.
It's always a consultancy firm, or it's always a think tank, just lending people as staff in to help, do the work that should be done by somebody else.
Yes, definitely. Having a nightlife in a safe city would be a wonderful thing to experience.
Well, if you go to mainland Europe, they are everywhere. I was just in Montenegro for a week, just for a holiday with some friends, and I couldn't believe the beautiful sights I was seeing of an evening where young people were just out for free and a pint cost €2.60. I was having a wonderful time. €2.60 for a big pint of local beer that was delicious. And I honestly think that, hey, if it would be wonderful to experience, then mainland Europe is your place to go.
Yeah, you know what? Like, I was in Spain recently, and it's a slightly different thing. Because I was out there to partially to do some work actually, and I was talking with a relative of mine who lives out there, who I was staying with, and he was saying that people in the UK, people have cafes, and the cafes like the Acosta, they want to get rid of you as quickly as possible. You sit down, they're like trying to move you on pretty much as quickly as possible. And it's the same thing in the US as I understand it. The idea of a cafe is that you sit there for exactly as long as you need to consume their food, and then you fuck off and let them let that space be used by someone else for the night. But that's not the attitude they have in Europe. In a lot of Europe, and in Spain in particular, they want you to have a drink, and then they want you to sit at that seat for the rest of the night and get to know the staff, so that you build a long-term relationship with them, and the business looks like it's booming to everybody else who's wandering by, and it's so weird, the difference in sort of cultural attitude. Yes. But sorry. There used to be youth. Double D says there used to be youth clubs in community centres, and accessibility to sports facilities. Hell, even Laser Quest. Yeah, I miss Laser Quest. Laser Quest
is great. Yeah, it's the thing is, it used to be so many things like that all over the place. It just felt like it was so, and then it felt like they just evaporated. I don't know where they've. Well, I mean, we know where they've gone, but it's just crazy that it's just fallen apart like that.
Big time. This is another comment from Jay. What does Gen Z at the world's system of racial capitalism's imperialist core nation states have in common with Gen Z in the global south? Climate change and anti-capitalism. Yeah, exactly, definitely common ground there.
Yeah, which is why I think Gen Z is painted so terribly by people like the Daily Mail, because they see them as an adversary, which they should.
Yes, we are your adversary, Daily Mail. Don't forget it, particularly here at Turn Left.
Absolutely.
Yes. Zeke just became a YouTube member. Welcome to the community. Thank you so much. We appreciate your support so much. It helps. It's helping to build and grow the channel. This is all done on a voluntary basis at the moment, so we really do appreciate your support. Cool. That is the comment section done. So we have one more story, a final story of the night. Benjamin Netanyahu is known for getting on the wrong side of the courts and attempting to circumvent the court's power. Like any fascist movement from Mussolini to Trump to Netanyahu, with the backing of his party Likud, he has attempted to disregard the law time and time again. This culminated, of course, in a request by the International Criminal Court for his arrest on charges of war crimes. But Netanyahu is an ally of the West, so he can get away with anything. And this week, it gets even worse. According to the Times of Israel, Netanyahu called for his own Attorney General to open and then close an investigation into him to avoid the ICC's arrest warrant. Channel 12 News said Netanyahu wanted a probe into the ongoing war and how the military campaign against Hamas had been handled to be opened and then closed with an update filed to the ICC that the charges had been investigated by Israel and therefore do not require the court's intervention. According to the report, Attorney General Bahav Miara rejected the request on the grounds that it was a blatant ploy and would not satisfy the ICC. So let me just emphasize how insanely corrupt that is. Netanyahu is in charge of the Attorney General. It's his Attorney General. It's like the CEO of a company asking one of their employees to open an investigation into them and then immediately close it so that the police don't investigate whatever that CEO is doing. It's the kind of behavior you'd expect from like a Tudor monarch, not the leader of a country that wants to be a close ally of the UK and the USA. Countries that supposedly pride themselves on the rule of law and democratic transparency. So, Aidan, what do you make of Netanyahu's actions here?
Well, I mean, what do I make of his actions here? I mean, I think it's very interesting that he is trying to act as if he is the leader of the only democracy in the Middle East, whilst also behaving in such a way which we would say, hey, that doesn't feel too democratic to me. I've also seen as well that he's been freaking out because of this documentary that's been released, which features his interrogation, in which you can see he is just a sleazeball is kind of the only word you've really got for it when you see any clips from it. He's just a gross individual. And I think him being outed in this way for the way he's behaving and being so corrupt is kind of creating a very difficult PR thing for Israel as well as America and the UK and any country that was so quick to jump to their defense when, after October 7th and everything all kicked off in a more major way. I think he's creating problems for his allies without maybe even necessarily realizing it. And given that we are technically his ally, I'm interested to see where we're going to go with this, where we keep trying to defend this man who, may he be a leader of another country, we would, invade in order to free them.
Yeah, part of the findings of the January 6th Commission investigating Trump was that Trump actually used his Attorney General to try and get the election overturned. And it smacks of the same kind of politician to me, right? It's the same kind of guy.
It's the same kind of guy.
Yeah, the kind of guy who doesn't actually, he's willing to take on the trappings of a Democrat. But at the end of the day, he's willing to leverage his power in order to maintain his own political career, like Trump and Netanyahu both. During, of course, Israel are now suffering quite a severe financial crisis. They're seen as a rogue state, and of course there's a massive risk of him escalating the conflict, as well as things like the dissolution of the international order and the kind of loss of trust among the West. Not that the West had much trust in a post-Iraq war world, but at least the humanitarian bodies often had a lot of trust that they could have enough influence to keep the worst war crimes, the genocide, right out of the political zeitgeist. And now it seems to me that a lot of that is being reversed just so that we can defend this absolute bastard's career.
Yeah, it's that. We are throwing away, I think, so let's say pre-World War II, we're throwing away, what is that, 80 odd years of work to create a more cohesive world in order to work together for aid, for charity work, for spending, for migration purposes. We're throwing all of that away in order to protect one man's career, in order to not be able to label him as a genocidal maniac, which anyone with a brain knows he is. It feels almost, it makes you think you're insane, doesn't it? It makes you feel insane for saying, why are we so intent on protecting this one man? To get rid of decades of work in order to get to internationalize help and for people in the most dire need. It's kind of like, it's so interesting because it's almost like we've forgotten the lessons that we learned from World War II and are just reapplying it again. It's insane.
Yeah, it does. I don't know if you've argued with many Zionists, but it does make you feel like you're going mad. Like I shortly after the Palestinian prisoner, slight trigger warning here, the Palestinian prisoner was raped by Israeli guards, and that was caught on camera. And the medical reports from the Israeli detention center all corroborated this. I went up on a live to talk to a Zionist, and they told me that it didn't happen. That wasn't what was going on. That the medical reports had actually found that he'd been fine. There was no damage to him. He'd actually injured himself, arsing around in the prison, and there was nothing really that had gone wrong. And it's like you people are actually really disconnected from reality, because this was a big, inside Israel, the defense wasn't this didn't happen. The defense in Israel, among even Likud judges, was, oh no, this did happen, but it was a good thing. And it's the disconnect. For me,
and that's how Netanyahu and Trump, I think, perfectly aligned it again. It's that MAGA mentality of being able to twist anything into actually being something good that should have happened because our ultimate leader is the one that said this is fine. We're glad this happened. It's just this cult. It's a cult-like following. It's a cult-like belief. And I mean, Zionism has become this just it's self-eating cult that's just going to get more and more insular to the point where it implodes, where it won't be able to survive off of the density of its own cultishness. Yeah,
and I think that maybe should be our message in this final story. Netanyahu is very Trumpian, and they have aligned interests, just as they have very much aligned politics. So I think we'll call it a night at that. So that is all for tonight. I want to thank everyone who tuned in. Thank you to Aidan for joining me tonight. Remember, you can find Aidan under @Goattmeall on TikTok. That's 2 L's and 2 T's. And I do hope that Aidan will join us again in the future. I really enjoyed talking to you, man.
I certainly will.
We will be hosting a debrief on Sunday as usual, with Normal Ireland shows on our regular Monday, Wednesday, Friday pattern from there. Now, I hope you all have a great weekend. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Patreon.com, Turn Left Media. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you, Turn Left.